welcome to another episode. I am your host, as always, Jeff Lambert. I am joined by my partner in crime, Rogelio Rodriguez. Rod, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
And I don't know about you, Rod, but I am very excited today. We have a special guest on the show with us. She is a teaching professor at Florida International University in the Department of Marketing and Logistics, and she has some great information to share with us today about predictive communication and survey design. Dr. Wendy Guess. Dr. Guess, thank you so much for taking some time to come on the show.
Hi, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be here.
Now, I am so excited to hear about your journey because as I was looking at your history and your educational and experience background on LinkedIn, I kept thinking, this is a really interesting journey that you've had to the point where we're sitting down to discuss this in your life. And before we get started, I'd love the chance for you to share a little bit about your journey into marketing and business. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So yeah, it is quite an unusual journey, I suppose, or an eclectic one anyway. Growing up, I was always involved in events, and with events, you have to have flyers and brochures and posters. And so just naturally had a connection to promotional activities. Then with my performing background in ballroom and folk dance, again, it's all about how you phrase it, if you will, or how you get people onto that dance floor when it comes to performing and teaching and choreographing. And choreographing kind of works on what's the message we want to share and how do we go about sharing it with the audience. So from those perspectives, along with my anthropology and health and wellness background, it just kind of naturally gravitated towards marketing.
Right. I think I heard you mention right before the show, it's like you need marketing for every facet, right? You need to be able to spread the message. So I think that
Exactly.
resonated with me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's, they often say, or I've heard it said over the years, that every business is a marketing business that just specializes in certain products.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's how I feel about every business we interact with, for sure. Can you go a little bit deeper into your philosophy of interacting with businesses?
Well, yeah. So as we said, businesses are there for a purpose and for a service or a product. They're there to connect with their customers and hopefully in today's world, continue solving problems that the customers are having. I think especially as we move on from the COVID time, or whatever we want to call this, Coronaville time, that, that's going to become even more of an issue, right? Or even more of a factor in that we've had a few months to kind of go, what are we really doing here? And do we need this level of consumerism, if you will, that we've experienced in the past? I not to get into prediction mode, but I think we're really going to start seeing that people are going to look at companies differently and want more substance from those companies and not just cheap products.
And marketing really is all about adapting to the situation. And like you said, we're seeing a major shift, I think, not only in how businesses reach out and interact with their audiences, but even how audiences interact with these brands that they come to know and support. The whole game is changing right before our eyes. And
exactly. Exciting times to be in marketing.
Absolutely, because we're all going to have to stay on top of what's working, because what was working even 10 months ago may not be the case in 60 days from now. It's a scary thought, but it's also an exciting thought at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, it's like every time we have a major shift, whether it's a technology shift or an economic shift or a recession, anytime there's a major shift, we start seeing some businesses kind of didn't stay with the wave and they're now gone. For example, not to keep picking on the poor Kodak moments and the Blockbusters, but now Sears and Pennies and some that were staples in our U.S. economy and lifestyle generations are now, are now facing a whole different level of how do we keep up?
It's true.
Or do we keep up?
Or
Or
do
do
you
we
keep up?
become, yeah.
Yep. If
No,
you had told someone
absolutely.
50 years ago and jumped in a time machine and said both Sears and J.C. Penney are both going to be dead companies within, a 40 to 50 year span, people would have thought you were crazy
What?
because they cornered the market. They were the two big kids on the block.
They were the market.
Yeah, right,
It's true.
right.
So that brings us to, you've pioneered two different strategies that I wanted to talk about that we could give to people who want to really take a step forward in connecting with their customers. The first one, and I think there's a lesson here of what we can take from the past and move forward with, you have a strategy philosophy overall about the essential elements of interaction. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So from my background in anthropology, I was drawn to that because I wanted to understand, I guess, and learn more about how businesses, how cultures, how people, how basically the world was engaging or interacting with each other, communicating with each other or not. And I started seeing patterns, if you will, of that process. And then from my experience, my performing experience with ballroom dance and social or folk dance, the whole spectrum of dance, I experienced like there's this silent language, if you will, of communicating and interacting and how you connect with either that line dance or circle dance or partner dance, how all of those, there was just sort of this unwritten language as you connect with another person. And then from my wellness and fitness experience, that kind of went just hand in hand with dance, that, there's this other level of interacting that includes the mind with the body or the body with the mind, and not just, verbal communication or written communication. So from there, I kind of noticed these universal themes, if you will, for living. And that's why I decided, well, this sounds kind of like there are some basic elements that guide our interactions with everything that we do. And those basic elements are kind of creating meaning or order, connecting. And that's like that networking and building rapport, working on those both personal relationships and community relationships. And then master, which is, mastering ourself, our inner dialogue, our motivation, all those things that go on inside here that consume us sometimes.
It sounds like you're really keying in on the fact that historically we're a social species, that we want to connect with each other, and that superficial approach that sometimes shows up in marketing where you get these impersonal emails, here, add this link to your website and I'll add my link to yours. That kind of just, that skimming the top, I'm doing the bare minimum. I don't really care about what you're doing. I just want to get mine. That's really not a good way to build relationships with other businesses or with customers.
No, and I see this a lot, unfortunately, on LinkedIn, where you have the hunters, if you will, running around grabbing all of these different LinkedIn connections, and then immediately send a message, hey, I've got this great business. Why don't you join?
That's true.
Maybe you want to tell me who you are first. It's like, not to use a graphic description, but it's kind of like, hey, let's get married before we even introduce ourselves.
It's true.
Absolutely.
It's true. And brands care about that. Rod, we take that approach as well. Like, we want to know who our customers are and they want to know who we are. When you're investing and you're putting money into something, people want that relationship.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I use that example often, actually, when I'm having conversations with clients or anybody, when you're asking for information on a website, it's just, you can't ask for too much in the beginning. It's like asking them to get married on the first date, right? Like that's what
right. It's like, are you going to be the Tinder or are you going to be the eHarmony kind of,
right.
or the old fashioned dating,
Right. Absolutely. And I read on your profiles about predictive communication. Would you be kind to share some information about predictive communication with us?
Sure, of course. So that was, I guess you could say, kind of an extension of this idea of the elements of interaction, in the sense that too often we have communication that's just sort of random. Like, you've probably felt like in the past you've spent like way too much time answering the same emails over and over and over again, the same questions. You've probably gotten emails or received emails that were like just, a whole book when you really just needed one snippet of information. Or maybe you're receiving like unrelated emails from businesses. I notice a lot now with retargeting and all of the AI technology that's going on in marketing is that the companies are like, oh yeah, they've been to our site. And then they start sending you things to buy and you're kind of going, I just bought that.
Yeah.
Like, hello. And then also sometimes you're getting too much information, not enough information, or it's the time of that information, right? It's sent out a month in advance and you really needed it like 2 days in advance. And so then it gets lost in your email box, etc. So I started looking at this idea based on the concept of predictive analytics, which is like using data to kind of predict when you do things or what forecast when are good times to do different marketing decisions, and said, well, this could be applied to our communication style too, because right now we're like just overwhelmed with TMI, right? Too much information all over the place. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, really helpful to think about planning the design of your communication so that it makes sense for the customer. So it's kind of I kind of look at 4 areas, or 4 questions you could say to ask when you're planning a communication process or an autoresponder process is, what am I really delivering? Like, not just about the product, but what am I really giving them? Am I giving them something about, brand connection, or am I giving them something more related to the product, or to just, another general message, right? What am I really delivering with this communication? And then I'm looking at also, how do they really feel about whatever it is I'm delivering? For example, something about a product. What do they think about it? And maybe that's a great time to ask in a survey type format or some kind of a survey market research. It's like, we want to understand how you're using the product, how you're thinking about it. What is it doing for you? What concerns or what are you noticing that we could help improve upon the product? Things like that. And then the third question is also like related to the product or service. What is it they really need to know about it? So I think of the example of one time recently, I purchased something online, and during the shipping time, between the time of the order and the time I received it, they send out a couple of emails like, okay, great, you just bought this product. Well, let us tell you a little bit more about, how we're getting your product ready and where it's coming from and the timing and all of that. And then they sent another email with, hey, so you've probably seen some different instructions on how to use this product. So here's our suggestions for how you use this product or how you set it up. And I thought, well, wow, that's really what I'm thinking about right now. So perfect, you read my mind, right? And then the last question is kind of when, and this is about timing. When do they really need this info? And that has to do with more of like when you send what. Like, obviously, directly after an order, you want some kind of confirmation. Okay, so then do you wait another day, 2 days, however long to say something more about the product? So that timing becomes really essential. And I've also notice this with my own students. If I send them the whole course up at the beginning, it's gone. But if I give them the relevant pieces at the relevant time, for example, hey, this assignment is now open, so here's some things you need to know about this assignment. And then I've answered a ton of questions right when they were thinking about those questions. And so, for me, it's like great because it reduces the overall emails that we're having to exchange back and forth. And
Sure.
so same with customers and companies.
Yeah, it's important to be contextual, like you said, giving the right information or the right help or asking the right questions at the right time. And I'd like to jump into that a little bit. And I want to talk to you about how you make your feedback engaging so people actually want to talk to you and give you that feedback so you can do better at providing that predictive communication. But I want to go over the boring thing first. And it might not be boring to you and me because we're both from educator backgrounds, but the part that no one likes to pay attention to sometimes is the research method, thinking about how you want to get that feedback and do it in a way that it's actually constructive. You can do true and false, yes and no, all these different approaches. There's qualitative, quantitative. It's important, right? The approach that you put together?
Yes. And I think one of the things that I find most personally fun about education is taking the terms and making sense out of them for students or for, my audience, if you will. And that is, it's like, okay, at the end of the day, when you go work, we don't care if you know what the terms are. We care if you know what to do with them. And so that's kind of my philosophical approach, if you will, in your undergraduate degree, you got to learn a lot of terminology, but every industry has a set of terminology and lingo that's unique, right? So you want to be able to sound like you can speak the lingo, but then it's more important to understand what you're doing that and how that's guiding your day-to-day functions, right? Look at marketing. Like, do you know what the ROI of the click-through rate and it's like people that aren't dealing with marketing, and we've had students from other degrees as well, and clients that I work with who are dealing with their business, and they're like, what? What language are you speaking? So it's important, for one, that we speak the language of the user or that client. So again, got some more questions, but when you're looking at that research method, it's really important to ask yourself, what am I really trying to find out? What am I really needing to know? And that basically then tells you what kind of information to gather. So we'll use that instead of research because of all that baggage, but we're always gathering information, right? Whether it's about the industry, about our company, about our product, about our buyers, we need information. And so surveys and questions are a great way to start gathering that information, as well as asking Google, because, Google knows all, right?
It's getting there.
So they think.
All knowing.
Yeah, but it's like, it's one source, or it's,
Sure.
One of many sources.
Yes.
So first, it's like, what is it you really want to know? Are you trying to figure out how your brand is doing? Are you trying to figure out how, what your customers think about a product or how they're using the product? Or are you trying to, put a bonus ability on your sales force or sales staff? So from that perspective, we need to know what we want to gather. And then we want to basically decide how we're going to understand or gather that information. So are we trying to, for example, give a rating to something or a score? Like, 1 to 5, have you been into our store this past year, right? Or how did you, how was your experience with the last customer service phone call? Okay, so if we want just simply a rating, great. And we all know, I hope we know, that numbers can be Numbers are numbers, but how they're skewed and interpreted, that goes a whole nother direction,
Sure.
right? So if you've just got a simple rating score, you might then go, well, 4.8 stars out of 5 says we must be doing awesome, right? But then once you go down and you actually read some of those, let's say, reviews on sites, especially like on entertainment sites, I notice on, for example, Amazon, they'll rate something really low that has nothing to do with the movie itself. They're actually rating maybe the delivery or the quality, or there's something didn't work. And so now people are going, oh, that movie must be bad because it's got a low rating. But really it was nothing to do with the movie itself, right? So we want to be sure that, we're getting the right kinds of information. But so quantitative, I keep using those finger quotes. Quantitative is when you're trying to create a numerical or a metric or some kind of rating on a product or service, right? But if you want to get deeper into the insights of what the customer's thinking or what they're feeling about it, then you're going to shift to what we use in the social sciences called qualitative. And you're finding a lot of this being gathered in marketing as well, because it helps you get deeper inside a brand. So for example, you can do just the basic questions. Well, do you use this? Tell me about your experience using this product or service. Because then you get into what the person's actually thinking about it. So, an example there is focus groups, right? You gather a few of your best customers together and say, you've seen the growth of this company for, whatever number of years. So tell me what keeps you coming back? What keeps you buying our product? So those are more open-ended questions, but they're going to give you some deeper insights, right, to where you want to go with it, right? And then
I think it's...
I get excited. Can you tell?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you're going in that direction. I actually, while you were talking, I got 100 questions going in my head, but we don't have time, I know. So I will keep to the one that has been at least on the top of my mind, right? Because we're collecting this information for our clients, for ourselves, and we deal with it also in academia. And one of the concerns that I have is how, especially when it's a large amount of data that you're gathering, right? Let's stick to qualitative at this point, right? We get answers from 500 people. Do you have a tool, right? Or something that will help you analyze a little bit faster? Because I've been in the weeds, sitting down and analyzing spreadsheets of responses, and it's been a little bit of such time-consuming task that I feel there should be a tool out there. And I found a few, but I would love to hear your ideas on.
Yeah, unfortunately, the tools for qualitative are not as time efficient.
Sure.
or any. You're going to find the best tools with the quantitative, because it's all about delivering those surveys and online surveys, which, hey, that's where it's at. But to your point of looking at tons of responses, there is a way to there is one method that you can use that kind of helps you, the processor. It's actually what I did my dissertation using, which is called the Delphi method, where you start with one very general question and you can send it out. Now we can send it out via a survey format, but leave it free response. Now you've got, a gazillion answers, and then you send it back to the same group, if you will, or additional groups, and you say, okay, so help us understand, do these connect the same way? Do they relate the same way? Do they belong in groups together? That type of thing. Or do they, how would you rate them? And then from there, you might do one more round of now rate them again. Here's our short list. Now rate them. So you might even look at like how you go about choosing employees, you know, from 100 resumes, you take it down to maybe your top 5 or 10, and then you even narrow it down as you get more clear on what it is, where there's consistencies or not consistencies, who stands out, who, that type of thing.
Okay.
So from the research, you know, from the qualitative method, one, you get a smaller focus group,
Sure.
or you send out the broad question and see what comes back, and then narrow it down by a rating scale.
Got it.
But then for tools, like for the quantitative, do we want to go there, or?
Yeah, but sure. That'll be great.
Yeah. So I find, you know, there's every kind of tool you would want, from free to very, very complex. So your freebie one, everybody has access to, is Google Forms. So it's within the Google Drive family, right? And it kind of a very simple form structure, where if you want to do an RSVP all the way down to a complete, you know, site registration for some event, to you know, to a small, less complex survey of some basic questions, and then it records all the answers on a spreadsheet within the Google Drive system. Okay, so then another one that has a little bit more of aesthetic quality is called sogosurvey.com.
So go.
Another freebie, yay. And then you have kind of that intermediate one with SurveyMonkey, which a lot of businesses do use, and it's you know, on the lower end of lower to medium end of paid surveys, but it gives you a lot of flexibility, and you'll see that used in a lot of different settings. And then kind of what I would say is the Mercedes or the gold star is that Qualtrics.
Mm.
XM, I think they're adding to their branding as well. And that is much more comprehensive. It's used both by academics and businesses. It also, for a fee, has availability to get survey panelists, because that's one of the challenges, is getting to the right audience if they're not already in your database. Right. Or if you're looking at new products, you know, you want to find a brand new audience as well sometimes. So that one has a lot of the extra bells and whistles that you might find in more of the complex or longer surveys that really get down deep into a topic. Mm-hmm. And then one extra tool that you're going to find a lot in the academic world anyway is the SPSS. And that is like, it's a statistical analytics tool. So when you get down to the crunching the numbers part, that's where you go there.
Now, Dr. Guess, you know, let's pretend I'm one of your recent graduates at school. I'm launching a business, a startup that I'm very excited about. I have some seed funding. I've identified my target customer. I want to send out some feedback to see how my initial round of buyers enjoys my product in terms of its quality. Just to give a hypothetical, because I think it's always great, especially for people that are new to marketing or maybe who are business owners who haven't done this yet, you know, engaged in customer feedback. What would be your advice to take that first step? Where would I go in this first venture of mine?
First venture. Well, for one, depending, of course, like what kind of company you are you digital? Are you brick and mortar? You know, like that will impact some of the decisions you make. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we can get all fancy with our tools, but let me give you an example, if I can, from a nonprofit company. That, of course, during all of this economic shift, all of the major funding sources are gone. But thankfully, they had, they have a database of people who've been involved with the organization over the years, and also a social media presence. So they had this very question, how do we connect with our people? And they set out a short appeal letter, kind of like, hey, here's where we are, here's where we're trying to go. For us to survive, we need your help. And then there was a very clear link to the website where they could do different types of donations. Along with that, they made sure they had a very clear response, a thank you response, and then a second appeal that went out both on social media and email. And so they were genuinely surprised at the amount of response to that. Okay. And that people, it was written from an authentic place. Mm-hmm. This is really where we are, and we can't survive without you, kind of a resource. And actually they got quite a good response from that. So that all to say, take your time and be authentic when you're asking. Be clear what you're asking so that you can really appeal to your customers of, here's why you're asking their input. And here's what you're really trying to learn and do and find out from it. And then, keep very narrow, ask maybe one or two issues. Don't try to solve the whole company problem in one survey, but really focus in on what is it that you really want to know specifically, one or two things, and then keep your questions related to those things.
I think overall, customer feedback, it's a long process, and every market is different. Like you said, every business is going to be different in terms of what they're trying to get in terms of feedback. So I would encourage our listeners to get started. You take these ideas from Dr. Guess, be contextual, but keep trying, keep building, keep sending out those calls for customer feedback.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Guess, you have written books, you teach, you've spoken at conferences. There's so much more to learn about what you've shared with us today in terms of predictive communication and the elements of interaction. How can our listeners connect with you to learn more about your work and what you have to share about marketing effectively?
Well, thanks. So probably the quickest way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is Dr. Wendy Guess, DrWendyGuess. And then I have a website, drwendyguess.com. And so those are probably the best ways to connect. And that's where I do more of the articles that I write related to marketing. And then, if you're into a whole different category, I also have a podcast as well. It's less about marketing, but more about that idea of the elements of interaction and thinking about how we interact with ourselves, how we become our higher self or the best version of ourselves. And that's called indigotent.life. So.
Well, I have a new podcast that I'm going to check out today, so that's perfect.
Yes.
Great.
Dr. Guess, thank you so much for coming on the show. Hopefully we can have you back again on another time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Good luck to everyone.